Truckers of Reddit. Which state country is the worst to drive through? Story 1. Georgia is fine except for Atlanta. Going into or around Atlanta is a nightmare. Atlanta is such a horrible place to be in or around that it actually does make Georgia the worst state all on its own. New Jersey, plus anywhere around NYC. Incredibly congested, tight roads, tolls, complicated interchanges, insane traffic. California, 55 mph, an idle limit and awful traffic in many spots. The state feels actively hostile to trucking. Like in bringing you guys your stuff? Chill. New Mexico, extremely bad road conditions. Story 2. Anywhere from DC and up because of traffic and tight roads, because all those old cities were built before semi-trucks. Wyoming and Nebraska because of wind. During the winter, add snow to the mix and it's a recipe for disaster. Nebraska also sucks because of truck traffic on I-80. You wouldn't think so because it's the middle of nowhere, but that's actually one of the busiest freight corridors in the country, so it's just constant trucks trying to pass each other while holding up literally everyone. Florida sucks because it's hard to find good-paying freight out of the state. California sucks because they have a commercial vehicle speed limit of 55 mph. Like see 'em on y'all. This ain't 1975 anymore. We can go a little faster. It's okay, I promise. Edit also shout out Indiana for having the worst roads of any state. You definitely know when you've crossed the border into Indiana. Story 3. The worst in which case? Roads? Indiana? Or New Mexico compete traffic? Any major city, honestly. Dallas is my personal hatred. Confusing. NYC takes the cake. The rest of NY is fine by comparison. Oh, trucks only on Parkway. Okay, well, this lane is a throughway. Okay, let me get over after fighting the four-wheelers. Cool. I'm good here for a minute. Wait, this lane is 128 clearance. I gotta get over again. Sorry. Now I'm on a freeway. Am I allowed here? Maybe it's a highway, and I'm cool. Here we go again. Here's the GW bridge. Okay, trucks on upper level only, but I'm on the lower level. How did I even get here? Okay, whatever, here's a 300 toll. Cool now, I'm here. And I have to make a U-turn to get into the delivery since that is, quite literally, the only option. Sweet, what a fun time. Goodness me, it's 12F and freezing with snow coming down. I'll keep the truck running so I don't freeze. And here's a sweet ticket from the nice officer on a bicycle. Don't run him over, I say to myself over and over again. Patterson, NJ. First time I literally feared for my life. Story 4. Years ago, I drove across Louisiana and the entire state's highway system except 50 miles was under construction. No exaggeration, they were repaving the whole state. There was an apology sign when you crossed the state line. I was making the trip with a friend pulling a 28 boat on a trailer in a diesel dually pickup truck so very wide, very big, and very loud. The highway was down to a single lane, cat-in-the-hat construction barrels on the lines on either side, in a downpour, at night with several inches of standing water and zero shoulder literally dropped off several inches on one side and concrete barrier on the other, with no breakdown lane and no open exits for miles. I couldn't see anything beyond my headlights and only the barrels marked the road. There was wind, but thank God we were too heavy to blow us off the road. It was so. We couldn't even switch off drivers. I was in tears and screaming about all the exits closed, hunched over the steering wheel trying to see in the darkness ahead. I had several miles of vehicles behind me, just an endless string of headlights. It was the fear of going too fast and fishtailing or hitting the barriers, but also concerned I was holding up dozens of cars. There were places where I felt the trailer hydroplaning. After about an hour of crawling along at 30 mph, still in tears because I knew everyone behind me was pissed off, we hit an exit and I pulled off to allow everyone to pass. Every single vehicle followed me off that exit. I pulled into a truck stop and got out of the truck because I wanted to throw up from being so stressed. So many people pulled up to thank us for leading the way because they were so scared. And apparently my big truck sort of parted the water and left sort of tracks they could follow. Many people said they could only see the lights on our truck through the rain, and they figured if we could make it, they could too. There was a motel there. All of us stayed the night. I will never do that again. Story 5. Not a trucker, but DFW is terrible and terrifying. I pray I survive the trip every time I have to drive across the Metroplex. People will literally try to run you off the road when you're going 80 mph in the right lane. Also, they say our state flower is the traffic cone. Construction is never ending. Story 6. Questions like this annoy me because there's at least two separate aspects that can easily be their own discussions. First, the roads themselves. Poor conditions and maintenance, bad signage, tolls, interchanges, etc. Second, other drivers. People's driving habits don't change state to state, but they do change region to region. And people from inner cities drive different from those from the suburbs, and then there's people from the country. Then there's traffic. Then there's troopers. Then there's maintenance differences between the interstate, state roads, county roads. Then there's way stations. Then there's blah blah blah. Indiana has roads, but they drive normal. Florida has good roads but drivers. So where does anyone really begin? Story 7. My Sil dislikes the city of Chicago, Southern California, and I hate Salt Lake City. But he does talk about truck stops, with passion, more than the roads. Story 8. I can't believe I haven't seen it yet, but Florida. Everyone goes at least 15 over the speed limit and cut each other going high speeds on the interstate. Story 9. For a question aimed at truckers, a lot of non-truckers are answering. I've only driven way coast, so I can't speak for west of the Mississippi. Atlanta does. Next obvious is NYC. The state I dislike the most is PA. Too many roads that are way past due for expansion. And those roads that they are working on have had the same stretches worked on for the last 10 years with little progress, it seems. And the roads just aren't in great condition. Story 10. For road conditions, I-70 east of Indianapolis is always mentioned as the worst road in the country. For traffic, you'll get different answers, but Atlanta is one of the most commonly agreed upon ones. I personally have always hated Orlando as well. Story 11. There's really no single worst place. It's more like tiers. Top tier. Terrible. Atlanta, California, North Jersey, Rhode Island, New York City. Dumbest clearances in existence, and a general cluster. Indiana mid-tier. Michigan. North Louisiana roads were subjected to carpet bombing and never repaired. Apparently, Baltimore-DC stretch playing interstate slinky at all times. Southeast Pennsylvania 50-50 toss-up. At some times being terrible. Florida, Houston, Carolinas. Edit apologies for formatting. I have no idea why that's happening. Story 12. People keep saying cities. Few are answering states to travel through. This ex-trucker says Kansas. So flat. So monotonous. So easy to lose your mind. Story 13. Not a trucker, but someone who had to purchase a stupid amount of rental cars for work. We were actively encouraged to Uber in Houston due to how horrible the accidents levels road conditions were. I imagine it was some insurance thing, but still was a fun fact from my experience in corporate America. Story 14. As a local trucker in SW, Idaho, that's only driven in SW, Idaho, the Treasure Valley, and I-84 cutting me off when I have a company-mandated 7-second following distance, and now I'm going 40 in the right lane, just to get cut off more. Story 15. Not a trucker, but guyman. Okay? It is a major trucking route and is always under construction. The road is always so torn up it turns to gravel, and there's always faulty stoplights at the intersections that confuses everyone. Story 16. For the drivers I manage in our area, it's Chicago. Horrible traffic and construction. The only bright spot is you can take about 5 different routes to the same places. It doesn't help, because traffic is on all of them. But it's a nice change of scenery while you're sitting in gridlock. Story 17. I've only driven in the Great Lakes area, so I'm biased. Chicago can go to. I moved from Atlanta to Chicago in 2019. Why? Traffic. That's it. It was so bad my wife refused to leave the house the last 2 years we lived there. I'm not even joking. My 10-mile commute to and from work was 5 hours. The worst day ever. I parked my car in the middle of traffic, walked to a nearby fast food restaurant, got a snack and walked back pre-COVID when fast food was actually fast. No cars had moved. Nobody was even bothered. I wouldn't move back for $500K a year. Not worth it. Story 18. Not a trucker, but I've driven in or through most of the lower 48. I'm here to nominate Puerto Rico as the single worst driving experience of my life. Any jokes or anecdotes you've heard about people in the Caribbean living on island time are immediately thrown out the window as soon as they get behind the wheel of a car. Insane speeds, terrible road conditions, and stupid amounts of traffic around San Juan in particular. Borinquen, You are so beautiful, but I swear you aged me 10 years in a week. Story 19. Not a trucker, but I have driven cross-country. For me, it was New Mexico. Just hours and hours of driving in a straight line with nothing left or right of you. Go over a little hill and watch the road dip down and rise to another little hill. Forever. Story 20. For me personally, it has to be the Midwest. There is nothing, and it's a straight road with no traffic, sometimes for miles with no one else in sight. Makes me fall asleep, so I would stop every 2 hours just to get off the truck and smack my head against a rock to wake up. It used to be I-40 in Arkansas for me, but they finally have most of it rebuilt now after like 20 years. The potholes were so bad it was like off-roading in Moab at 55 km/h. Story 21. I'm no trucker, but I drove a small VW Golf around in Thurshaven, Faroe Islands, and cold barely make the turns. To make it worse, Google Maps kept telling me to drive into non-existing roads and straight off the cliffs. Story 22. No one's going to care, but I've spent a bit of time driving through some provinces and U.S. states. Alberta, BCE, Saskatchewan, Montana, Washington, Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. All major cities to drive in. Edmonton sucks. Calgary is pretty bad. Seattle gave me a headache. Las Vegas made me understand road rage on a deeper level. And Phoenix is too hot to exist. But all of them are cakewalks compared to Salt Lake City. 3 separate close calls, and I've only driven through Salt Lake 4 times. One involving a painting truck and blind merge so close his bumper actually took a fleck of paint off mine. The second time driving through Salt Lake, a minivan overflowing with Mormon children had to swerve to avoid crashing into me at a red light I had been stopped at for a full Christian minute. The third and final time I saw sedan ripping down the shoulder going about 120 km/h before he hit loose gravel and rubbed up against the guardrail. He didn't even slow down. He just disappeared into the sunset. That's quite the collection for such a small sample size. Mormon God must be real and keeping all these people alive. I just remembered the time I was driving north up Highway 15 and encountered what I can only describe as an avalanche of bunnies choking up entire road. All 4 lanes, and we couldn't see the markings because of the sheer volume of rabbits. We waited 2 hours in the middle of the night waiting for the horde to dissipate. That was just outside of Salt Lake City and obviously had nothing to do with the drivers, but I think it's more compelling evidence that the roads around it are in fact cursed. Story 23. Bruh, I swear there's a few highways that it feels like my steers are gonna fall off because the roads are so bad. Mississippi roads are. I-35 south of Des Moines is in bad condition, and recently I drove on HWI 75 north right before Denison TX, and that HBY bout bucked me out of my seat. Cali sucks to drive in. Feels like they hate truckers there. One of the most beautiful drives I have done those is I-70 between Utah and Colorado. But then you get to eastern Colorado and into Kansas, and I-70 is horrendous. Story 24. Nearly every time I've driven through there, I've watched cars zipping around other cars only to wreck later down the road. I've watched multiple road rage incidents. I've witnessed someone pull a gun out on another car twice. I live on the opposite coast and never saw that happen. So for it to happen twice in the same vicinity a couple years apart makes me nervous. One time I had a car behind me while I was in the right lane follow me so closely around 2 a.m., even though I was going about 8 mph over the speed limit. They kept flashing their lights at me. They could have gone around me because we were the only cars on the road. Took an exit and they followed. Got back on the highway and they followed. They eventually took an exit. Pretty much anything shitty I've witnessed during a road trip has been in Louisiana. Story 25. I-95 is the worst. Doesn't matter what state you're entering leaving from. I know people who will drive through PA down to NC to avoid that DCVA area. Route 15 from PA down to NC. I may try it. Story 26. As a local LTL driver in California, I hate to say the obvious answer, but California. It's probably the state that is most hostile towards trucks with their legislation, and being confined to 55 mph statewide is literally on earth. Of course, there's tons of beautiful places to see, but the laws and regulations kill it for me. My home state of Georgia is a close second because of Atlanta traffic, and I truly believe there's more cops than citizens that live there. If you drive on any interstate in Georgia, you are guaranteed to see at least 5 traffic stops. I've driven in all lower 48 states and have never seen more cops and traffic stops than I have in Georgia. Story 27. Not a trucker, but a full-time RVer that pulls a 35-foot fifth wheel through the USA. Without question, the worst stretch of interstate I have been on in the country is I-70 in Indiana, specifically the section east of Indianapolis to the Ohio border. I drove over it about 3 weeks ago, and I am still in Pittsburgh waiting on parts to fix my suspension because of that road. I will forever do anything to avoid that stretch of I-70. Story 28. Going through Portland is the worst. They bottleneck a lot of the junctions. Some junctions go down to one lane, which is crazy, and they can't improve the highways. When I asked around about why they built them like this, their main excuse is they didn't think Portland would blow up the way it did. Like TF, is a port city and a major corridor. Story 29. My dad, a trucker. Since the 80s, so he's been around, complains a lot about the East Coast, Texas, and Wyoming. The East because of the traffic and chaos, Texas because it's huge. The interstate system is complicated and always under construction, and Wyoming because it is an irredeemable wasteland of wind. Though, to be fair, I genuinely think he hates driving everywhere in the US. Can't blame him. Story 30. My buddy refused to drive into California, and the one time delivered to Florida spent many days awaiting a load. Pickup ended up being in Georgia. Several trips to the East Coast, Maryland for instance, he found overnight parking unavailable. Story 31. To each their own, but for me, New York City and San Francisco had to rank amongst the worst when I was trucking. If you ask me, neither of those places was made for any vehicle larger than a Fiat. Story 32. I meet a lot of truck drivers from far-flung places in my line of work. I consider my area, Washington, D.C. metro area, to be a terrible place to drive, but they all seem to think Boston is the absolute worst. Story 33. Not a trucker, but I frequently take long-distance trips by road. Ohio by far, especially the Cleveland area. It's a crisscross of seemingly endless highways, a ton of traffic, variable speed limits that change with very little notice, and you constantly have to keep changing lanes to make sure you're not headed to the wrong city entirely whenever an interchange comes up. The roads are generally smooth, but the problem is that if you are in the wrong lane at the wrong time, you're headed to downtown Cleveland, on your way to Columbus, or back the way you came, and the only place you can turn around without driving through a neighborhood or making an illegal U-turn usually isn't for another 20 miles outside of Cleveland. Story 34. Not a trucker, but a lot of construction sites in my city have persisted through all my relationships since middle school. I get frustrated in a sedan. I can't imagine a truck and city drivers. Story 35. I'm retired since 2018. But some things never change. California can be rough because truck speeds are 55 in hilly terrain. It's super hard on the brakes to maintain that speed. Plus, there's so much territory to drive through at such a snail's pace. They usually let you go 60, but that's no guarantee. Everybody knows they can pull you down for a cash milking at any moment. I never minded grabbing some freight in SoCal and then heading into AS or NV, especially ducking into NV and driving through the desert on my way to Ontario. That was such a joy to drive. But having to drive up or down I-5 was never fun. I hate Ohio and Tennessee due to their systemically corrupt cops and way stations. I actively avoided the north-central East Coast, from Portland, Maine to the North Carolina border, from the water to the Appalachian foothills. That whole area is way overly populated, traffic is unpredictable, or jams are way too frequent. If you were paid by the mile, which would you prefer, a 620-mile day of nothing to look at, or a 450-mile day of constant traffic? Note that the 450-mile day would consume more fuel than the 620-mile day. You have to pay me extra per mile to drive in that whole region. Dumas Tex. Imagine you're driving hundreds of miles along a straight and narrow road with nothing in your way. It's such an easy road to drive. Then you hit dumbass TX with more than 25 traffic lights. If you hit one red, you will hit them all. Suddenly, your fuel mileages drops to nothing as you are constantly accelerating or braking all the way from one end of town to the other. Dumbass, it's such a well-named town. When I retired, a bypass was still just a pipe dream. I used to enjoy driving through Canada till 911. Now it's a lot more of a hassle. Story 36. Not a truck driver, but I lost years of my life when I lived in North NJ and had to commute Route 80W, 287N, RT10 every day back and forth. Some days it took 2 hours one way. Hearing about the sinkholes was surreal. Story 37. Not a truck driver myself, but during a recent trek from Canada to Florida, NC was the worst, partly because of the 2-lane interstate and trucks passing each other with the passing truck doing what felt like 14 prima faster than the truck they were passing, thus taking forever to get around these rigs. Story 38. I'm not a trucker myself, but know several based out of the Midwest and NYC, New England, Florida, and California are usually the places that most will refuse to go to if it can be helped. Story 39. Worked dispatch here in Canada. Northern Ontario is bad. H2I-11 is only 2 lanes and is considered the main east-west corridor through not just Ontario but also Canada. Small highway, lots of traffic, lots of accidents. HWI-17 runs east-west along the Great Lakes, but we tried to avoid sending drivers there as it's a more challenging drive elevation change-wise. And in the winter there was a high risk of lake-effect snow off Lake Superior, causing conditions to deteriorate quickly. Oh, and lots of moose collisions too. Story 40. We always thought Ohio was bad. The turnpike speed is lower for trucks and they will most definitely pull you over if you do speed. That was years ago though. Don't know about nowadays. Story 41. I imagine that winter in the Rocky Mountains has to be up here somewhere. Coming out of the Eisenhower-Johnson Tunnel, Colorado, on I-70 during a snowstorm has to be up there on the pucker factor scale. Driving 180 through Wyoming with 70 mph winds or road closures has to be annoying if not scary. Always a potential for blizzard on the Great Plains and I-90, as well as snowstorms throughout the various mountain passes. Story 42. What states do you feel address transportation infrastructure needs well? As in, they tend to keep to schedule, and their projects result in actual improvement. Story 43. As the country was being built and populated, and things pushed further west, the road became bigger and wider. With that being said, everything on the east side sucks. West Virginia is particularly bad, especially if you're off the interstate. Story 44. Lots of comments mentioning lots of places, but I swear the worst construction offender is Indiana. They flag miles at a time. I mean literally 40, 50 miles for a half mile of work. The entire zone is 1 lane, 50 mph. On an interstate highway, that's marked 70 mph. Literally, as you cross into the state, you enter a construction zone. The various zones butt up against each other. There are occasionally signs that end one zone and start the next held in the same base. The signs are in the exact same spot. And the construction work has gone on exactly like this for at least 17 years. I haven't been driving across Indiana before that. If the state wanted the speed limit to be 50, they could just do that, instead of the cockamamie plan for perpetual construction. Story 45. I simply cannot be convinced otherwise that cities that have construction for a decade are not involved in some sort of corruption meant to keep the money and kickbacks flowing. Looking at you, Akron, Ohio. Story 46. Colorado Springs. So, I've lived in Colorado my entire life and driven through Springs hundreds of times. I have yet to see I-25, the main corridor through town construction free, a single time. Story 47. Some places 10 years and the roads still being worked on. I-25 in CO Springs is a perpetual construction zone. Literally never seen it not be under construction. Story 48. The Northeast is the pits to drive in a car. I know Ohio is Midwest, but it isn't far and gets cold, so I imagine it is similar. I can't imagine doing any big northeastern city in a big rig. Story 49. You must be referring to I-35 between San Antonio and Dallas. Going to be even worse with Austin redoing the whole highway through downtown over the next 10 years. Story 50. Gotta be a racket of some sort, right? Friends or relatives of politicians or other big business groups that grab up the construction contract or bid, and it's just 5, 10, 20 years of construction on roads, but every year, big money. Story 51. The 10 or so miles of I-16 between Savannah and I-95 has been under construction continuously for like 20 years. Lots of people have died from it, but on the other hand, some committee chairman's buddy got some sweet government contracts, so. Story 52. Maybe if truckers of Reddit would stop constantly driving those roads, they wouldn't be due for more repairs by the time the last repairs were finishing up. Story 53. Seattle has hands down the worst drivers, and I've been in all major cities with few exception. Traffic in LA and SF is bad, but people at least don't drive like in Seattle. Story 54. Highways are an inherently inefficient mode of public transportation. We can barely afford to maintain much less expand them enough to handle demand in some areas. Totally losing battle, just look at how the Motor City itself, Detroit, basically collapsed after they bulldozed the city center for highways and parking lots. Story 55. I used to live in New Orleans and would come visit my friend in Little Rock since the 80s. I do not think I have ever driven through Memphis when some major part of the interstate wasn't under construction. Side note, I never go that way anymore. Story 56. This is my city. Interstate 35 was being worked on while visiting family. I had here as a kid 2002-ish, still currently is being worked on in much of the exact same way I've lived here for 16 years. So about 23 years of construction on the same stretch of 10 miles of road. Gotta cook those contracts, I guess. Story 57. Old joke from Houston-Galveston area. An Aggie graduates with a civil engineering degree and gets a job as a construction inspector on the Gulf Freeway. 40 years later, he retires as a construction inspector on the Gulf Freeway. I'm sure that joke is common around the country. Just pick a stretch of road. Story 58. That's because the lifespan of many roads is 8 to 10 years, and the lifespan of a highway rework is 10 to 15 years, at least my local one to Minneapolis. They are starting to rebuild sections of road that they've already finished because the wear and tear on the road is faster than the time it takes to build the road. We have so little public transit in this country, and it's sucking our resources dry. Story 59. Welcome to Los Angeles, where we have not stopped working on the 101 since the 1984 Olympics, and now we're currently working on it for the 2028 Olympics. Oh, and hey, we're working on the surrounding freeways as well, and adding pay lanes that make traffic even worse. Story 60. I managed for a huge conglomerate LTL company for a few years. We went everywhere. Through cartel country in Mexico, ice roads through Canada, no problem. NYC? We had a terminal in Jersey and brokered everything for NYC. Story 61. When I was driving, I used to get a bonus if a delivery required us to get off the highway in NYC. Take exit, receive 50. I didn't have to do it that often, thankfully, but I got irritated at more than a few cars, and on one occasion had to drive partially on the sidewalk for a block or so to make a turn, because some were double parked in the no parking zone at the corner of the intersection. It's there for a reason, FFS. Also, the bridge height signs should not be trusted. Story 62. I have a trucker friend who got stuck at some underpass in NYC and backed up a bunch of tunnel traffic. He was fined a few $1,000s. This was early in his driving career, and he still drives NYC as far as I know. Do truckers generally get to have choices not to do certain routes, or is it a seniority thing? Story 63. I met a trucker at a McDonald's in Iowa when I was bike touring and we had a cup of coffee together. He shared horror stories of having to service Brooklyn, driving an hour out of his way to avoid leaving designed truck routes, but still ended up getting pulled over for leaving the truck route. New Yorkers love to complain about trucks on the streets, but we need goods delivered, and those guys have a difficult job. Story 64. Just lost 150 for a lane from Lincoln Park, NJ, Eat Village, NYC, brutal. But the ones that do drive in the city are so efficient. They know that city inside and out. They know which buildings require what kind of services, where the delivery alleys are, who to talk to, what supplemental documents are required. Best delivery drivers in the business.